can see you there.
Hi. Welcome to episode 2 of Building Secure Applications. I'm Mike Colson, Senior Solutions Architect at AWS.
I'm Justin Stanley, Senior Solutions Architect at AWS. Today, Mike is filling in for Yuri.
Feel better, Yuri.
You might remember Mike from our lounge.
And in the lounge, I'm Ted. I'll be in the chat answering your questions and passing some on stage. And I'm an AWS Solutions Architect as well, and I got the good chair this week.
Hi, I'm Sai. I'm with AWS Professional Services. I'm here to help with some questions. That's it.
All right.
So last week we left off, we had a question that we thought we were going to take a little too long on, and we didn't have time. So we're going to dive into that this time. Now the question was around, we've talked about how to secure one account in last week's episode. But what if you have more than one account?
Yeah, so what is your governance strategy when you're talking about developing applications, typically not one developer and one account? So what are some strategies around that? How do we get to that level of security and provide some governance and control?
Well, let's talk first about one of the foundational things to federating into other accounts.
Yeah.
And that's something we touched on very briefly in the last episode, which is roles. Now, on my screen, you'll see a ridiculous amount of tabs, and the tab that I have open is on the roles page in the IAM console. Just so everyone's familiar, this is the IAM console, and here is roles. Now, roles are secure ways to grant permissions that someone with the correct permissions at the right time can assume that role. And they have all of the policies and permissions attached to that role. Now, this comes into play when handling multiple accounts.
Okay.
So, in handling multiple accounts, we built a service, which is a good thing.
Go figure.
I know, right? And that service is AWS Organizations. Now here I have a base account set up, a master account, and I'm going to just create a new account. Right? I've got one, I'm going to create another one. Organizations allows you to create accounts. It also allows you to set accounts in different groups, which can be very useful when you're planning through your multi-account strategy.
All right, so some of the things that you would think through for this multi-account strategy is maybe you'd have a master payer account to track billing up through. Mm-hmm. You might have a auditing account where you would export logs, right? You could have a production and development test and QA accounts so that you can limit the impact radius of the one account affecting others, right, from an environment standpoint. So Organizations allows you to set that structure and management from a top level and kind of build out the pieces and security requirements for each one of those underlying architectures underneath.
Absolutely. And you'll see here the new account that I created earlier today is up and it's running and it's got an account ID. And when you create an account, Organizations actually puts a role for you to assume into using service control policies. And you'll see here the policy that is attached is the full AWS access, which is very, very handy when it comes to using one login console with whatever identity provider solution that you have and federating into other accounts in your organization.
That's pretty awesome. So we have account segmentation now. We have that top level governance control. So let's talk a little bit about certificates.
So you want to talk about encryption?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we talk about security, we need to have encryption in flight and at rest, right?
Right.
So let's start with in flight and just how would we go about getting our first certificate for maybe a web application?
Well, that's a great question. And we built a certificate manager. I'm sure everyone here is just surprised.
Yeah, totally.
So here, earlier today, I actually registered a domain and requested a certificate from Amazon for twitchymctwitch.com.
Nice name. So this is in Amazon Certificate Manager.
This is an Amazon Certificate Manager.
Nice.
And you'll see that it was issued today, issued at this time UTC. It takes a little bit of time for all this to go through because it does domain verification that you actually own the domain. But because I registered my domain in Route 53, that was actually able to be much faster. So I registered the domain today in Route 53 and was able to use ACM a short time later after the domain was up and running.
So you're mentioning another service,
Let's take a look
Service
at it.
Alert. What's Route 53?
Route 53 is our domain management service.
So this would be globally distributed DNS and domain management.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome stuff.
And you'll see here that when I registered it, twitchymctwitch.com, it created a hosted zone. It created the whole record set for me, and then our Amazon Certificate Manager actually managed the verification of the domain with the certificate and was able to generate a certificate for me.
Nice. So we have our certificate.
Yep.
What can we do with this certificate now?
Well, you can put it on a website.
What?
I know, right? And I've done that. If you go to www.twitchymctwitch.com, as you can see here, you get this nice little green check in the upper left-hand corner. And if we dig into that, see it's verified by Amazon, but it's actually verified by Amazon and it's using TLS 1.2. But I think we have a question.
We do have a question. So the question comes in from Matsunel. Sorry if I butchered that. Will you be talking about security in Cloud Shield with Direct Connect?
We will be talking about Shield later on in this episode. We will not be talking about Direct Connect.
Yeah, not necessarily in this episode, but I mean, we could touch on it real quick. Direct Connect is one of the two methods for accessing AWS. So you have over the internet, or you can create a private connection through a Meet Me point where you manage last mile with your standard ISP provider, and you get a dedicated circuit in either 1 or 10 gig increments that can be bundled together to increase and aggregate the speed into AWS region. And we have things like Direct Connect Gateway that allow you to go to multi-region. So it's a great question. It actually helps us set up secure paths into AWS. And a lot of very secure environments and customers where there's lots of compliance concern actually go the extra mile and actually encrypt it, IPsec over top of that Direct Connect as well to get into their VPCs. So good question.
Yeah, hopefully that answered it. And we will be touching on Shield a little later in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we see the app, we see the TLS 1.2, which is important because...
Well, it's one of the minimum requirements for FedRAMP,
Yeah.
and it's important.
Yeah, so
FedRAMP
FedRAMP...
is a compliance standard.
Great, absolutely. So FedRAMP is one of the compliance standards for the U.S. government. So our public sector friends that are watching this are definitely going to be interested in knowing that AWS meets FedRAMP moderate and high, along with FISMA low through high, and DoD CCSRG impact levels 2, 4, 5, and 6. So a lot of different compliance matrices that we can go into, and we're going to touch on those in just a little bit. But so... certificates are great, right?
Yeah, very handy.
But the other thing that comes up is key management, right?
Yes.
So what do we have in the way of key management for our developers and our users?
Well, if only we had a key management service.
Man, it would almost be like you'd call it something like KMS.
I like that idea. Let's go with it.
Okay.
So here you'll see we've got a couple of keys that have been provisioned by Amazon for me with some of the things that I've used. ACM, or Amazon Certificate Management, has provisioned a key here for itself. I went ahead and provisioned a couple of keys in preparation for today. You can see I created them earlier today. And we can go through the process of creating a key very quickly. Now, of course, you might not want to create a key using this. That's totally fine. If you have your own key material you want to bring into KMS, that is something that it supports. So you can do that if you want to. We're not going to do that on a live demo.
Sure. So another thing you can do with KMS, it's not just the key creation though, right? You can manage and automate the key management and distribution.
You can.
So one of the things, I mean, in the 20 years I've been working IT across DoD data centers, is I like to talk about how often we do key rotation. It's pretty infrequent that you see key rotation occur, especially with data that's being encrypted at rest.
Yeah.
So can you kind of show us, like, what are some of the foundational things you can do with this key
Sure.
that will enable the security for the data to be continued and secured?
So as I go through the creation, you'll see some of the administrative privileges.
Yeah.
That is really nice and fine-grained. I can define user or roles on who can actually do things with this key. And you see here, I can actually choose not to allow administrators to delete this key. If I'm operating in the master account, I can restrict people's ability to delete keys, which can be particularly useful if I want, not to lose access to my data.
Right.
Kind of important.
Protect yourself from those bad actors.
Oh
Absolutely.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, those crazy people wearing hoodies and sunglasses while trying to type. So you can actually specify cross-account key permissions. I suggest, though, that if you're trying it out for the first time, get it working in one account and understand how KMS works.
Yeah.
First.
Smart.
So this is the policy generated for us based on the selections that I just made. I'm going to finish it, and that key is going to be created. And there it is. That's a key that I can use to encrypt data. Now, why don't I prove it?
Yeah, let's do that.
Because this is all about proving things. So I have this file called text.txt. And in S3, I can actually do this little select statement. And you'll see here server-side encryption is enabled on this particular object. And oh, look, in text.txt, I've got this password.
Oh, so we got an issue.
We should, yeah. I don't. It's encrypted, which is great. But if I want that to go away, all I have to do is disable this key.
Okay.
So it says disabled, right? I try the same thing again, and oh look, my key is disabled. It actually gives me the error here. That key is disabled.
Nice.
So that's pretty good.
So if you disable a key, you eliminate the access to the data that it's been encrypted with.
Yep.
What about deleting the key? What happens then?
So let's delete a key. This key is disabled. I'm going to go ahead and say schedule key deletion. And when you delete the key, and we're managing it for you, we're telling you right here and now, live, that when that's done, we don't have it. It's gone.
Right.
It is very much gone. So we actually schedule a key deletion, and there's a waiting period, a cooldown period. So that if you go, oh wait, no, we do need that key because we have this data we need to read. If I can't remember password, we have problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I confirm that I want to delete the key. I schedule the deletion. Status goes to pending deletion. Well, if I go try and access it, does that mean it's still live? Oh, no. The error has changed. It cannot access and unencrypt this for me. It says pending deletion. That might be a little small to read on my screen. It's a little small to read for me.
Sure. But so that basically sets up a crypto erasure process then.
It does.
So any data then that's been encrypted with that key is going to be wiped out.
It is. Now, if I change my mind, which I might, I need that password. I can cancel the deletion anytime during that waiting period. I re-enable the key, and I come back over here, and I say preview, and it's back.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive stuff. So now if you have data that's been compromised or data that you just need to get rid of, simple key deletion will now set up the erasure of all of that back-end data.
Which is really convenient.
Yeah, it's very
for staying
convenient.
secure.
So we covered how we create certificates and how we manage them. We've covered how the key management works. Could you show us how this might work for an application deployment and
Sure.
how we would get there and encrypt that application on the back end?
Sure.
Awesome.
So I have Twitchy McTwitch, www.twitchymctwitch.com. I'm surprised it wasn't taken when I tried to register.
Yeah, that's a pretty
It was
awesome name.
Shocking.
Should be a boat.
I thought about Bodie McBoat, but I think that was taken.
It's fair enough.
It is what it is. So I'm using the AWS Amplify framework for the deployment of an application. I've configured it to read a GitHub branch from a private repository,
All right.
authorized it with GitHub, and I'm going to make a change live and hope everything actually works well. So if I'm over here on twitchymctwitch.com, www.twitchymctwitch.com, because I was playing with redirects earlier, and I don't think there's enough exclamation points There's only
Never,
one.
never enough exclamation points.
You know what Terry Pratchett said? Don't trust anyone who uses more than 3 exclamation points.
Let's go 4.
Oh, you've got like 12 in here. All right, so I'm going to commit that change. All right, so I just changed my config. Well, let's take a look here. Oh, the build it's been recognized. That was actually really quick. The provisioning is happening. There's a whole provision, build, and deploy and verify. And so we're going to talk about something else while this actually happens.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have a question coming in from Training City.
Even better.
I currently use Let's Encrypt for my Docker container websites. Can I use Let's Encrypt with my containers in ECS instead of the AWS Cert Manager? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the beauty
for
of
it.
cloud is the choice. So
Yeah.
if you want to go through the Let's Encrypt process to build out your your encryption keys, then yeah, that's totally doable.
And if you've got a process that you've built for encrypting your containers, you could either replicate it or change it a little bit, deploy it in the cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Set
Choice is key.
set your automation platform of choice to leverage that Let's Encrypt key.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's great.
Thanks. So coming back to our build, how we doing?
We are hitting refresh.
All right.
We're still in the provision. Yes. So we're gonna come back to this while it's baking because that's always fun. Looks like we're at the build phase. It's
moving along. Perfect.
All right. I feel good about that.
So this is going to deploy to a static website running on S3, right?
Yep.
What if we wanted to use Elastic Compute Cloud, like EC2, to deploy to like a VM?
Let's take a look at how we might go about doing that. So we could put up a load balancer,
Yeah.
which I did earlier, but we can put up another one. Let's go ahead and say we've got a couple different choices here for load balancers. Let's touch on them briefly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think as we go about this. Do you want to talk about the classic load balancer?
Sure. So the classic load balancer was meant for layer 4 and layer 7 UDP TCP ports for load balancing your applications on EC2. We released NLB, or Network Load Balancer, to act more like a traditional load balancer where you can create target groups and VIFs for the front end accessing for application pools. And then we have the ALB, which is a layer 7 load balancer, which is what we're using here to target that application back end. So you walking us through here?
Yeah.
What do you got?
So just configuring the load balancer, which ports it's going to listen on, and then the security settings. Now, if I go here, the certificate type, because I've got one certificate in my ACM, Amazon Certificate Manager, it automatically preloaded. Now, if I wanted to upload my own certificate, sure, totally a thing you can do. If you want to use IAM instead of ACM, you can do that. There are some caveats there, and I would strongly suggest that ACM is a kind of, it's a managing for certificates.
Yeah.
That's
It's
what
a
there for.
readily made
It's readily
managed
made.
service. So yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So I'm going to pick a security policy, and since I know that I want TLS 1.2 in place, I'm gonna select that. You can dig into these over here, and in the documentation it goes and breaks down each of the policies. So I'm going to configure security groups. I've got this one that I created earlier for load balancers. I'm going to configure routing to a new target group. This is the adding of targets. Now I've got one machine that I spun up a few minutes ago here that's up and listening on port 80. So let's live demo. Port 80 instance. There's the health checks that we're putting in place. These are some basic HTTP health checks to make sure that the load balancer is routing the load appropriately.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Need to have those in place just so that you know which way the traffic's going to go, right? So,
and then I've got these two servers running, and only one of them is running an Apache website. So we're going to see the load balancer in action, hopefully.
all right.
So while that's creating, we're going to come back to the Amplify console, and we're going to see Verify. Okay, Verify's done, and Verify is actually really cool in that it gives me screenshots of your app homepage with a headless Chrome to ensure that it renders well at different resolutions.
That's really powerful.
It's just convenient.
Yeah.
I don't have to open up 14 different browsers or build my own automation around this.
Right. Yeah. It kind of gives you the preview of what you'd be testing there.
Well, and
right
let's
in the
see
console.
if my code changes went through. There they did.
Look at all those exclamation
That's a lot of
points.
exclamation points.
Beautiful.
That's very exciting.
Awesome. All right. So switching back to our ALB,
Yeah.
we've finalized that deployment.
Yeah. There's live Twitch. There's the ALB. Let's take a look and see. Yeah, I put that in search. Oh, it's still provisioning. There we go.
Okay. So what we're going to do with this ALB is we're going to terminate that SSL traffic or TLS traffic in flight.
Yep.
And redirect it to port 80 to the backend web server, right?
That's correct.
So now we've kind of encrypted to the backend web server.
Yep.
So all of our traffic in flight is secure.
Yep.
What about the block storage that's attached to that EC2 instance?
Now that is a good question. So I'm going to spin up a new instance.
Okay.
In EC2 because that's how we roll. I'm going to do a T2 micro because we're going to talk about encrypting block storage, and there really doesn't need to be a lot of compute.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to use just all the defaults. Probably not what you'd be doing if you were doing this for real, but I want to point out this. The boot volume for the T2 micro is not encrypted. It's a problem.
Yeah.
So how do we get around that? Well, I can add an EBS volume. I can either rehydrate a snapshot of something that I've previously done, if I want to do that, or, oh, look over here. That key that I created a short time ago, I'm going to encrypt this volume from a key we created live right now. There it is. Configure security groups. I'm going to use an existing security group that I have. Review and launch. I have an existing key pair. Now, all of that, of course, is something you can put in a template, so you don't have to go through the console every time.
Right,
It's
absolutely.
something you can build out a command line for, so you just drop it in. There's a number of ways to interface with the API. I'm choosing to do the console because of the ability to drill in on visual things like this.
So this is really taking the security, the standard requirements that would be split up across multiple groups typically. We're providing it through an automated formula through APIs to be able to provide these templates basically out to the app devs at the edge.
Yep.
So now all they have to do is say, okay, I'm ready to consume a secure environment to start developing my application or to deploy my application. And by setting the basics, the cert management, the key management, having the templates created for the block encryption for data at rest, we already showed that we can do the same type of data at rest encryption with S3, right? So we have the ability to not only get down to that level, but also to manage those keys, do key revocation, do key rotation, and set all of this security in place up front and automated so that when we go through all of these different accounts, moving from test and dev all the way to production, it's all automated and seamless.
Yep. It's about putting guardrails in place.
Yeah.
And working with the team, your security team and your application team working together, or dev team working together, so that you can build quickly but also securely.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the other services that we might want to touch on, actually, you know what? Let's hold off a second.
Sure.
Let's talk about something a little bit different.
Sure.
Let's talk about.
Uh-oh. This is where we're going? This is where we're going.
This is where we're going.
Let's go there.
Let's talk about GovCloud. So GovCloud is a secure ITAR containerized region, right, that AWS built to have U.S. citizens operating within continental U.S. for our public sector customers.
Oh, yes.
But it's not just public sector customers. Anyone who has that ITAR requirement can use it. And so if you have a need for international traffic and arms regulation, I can talk today too. Regulatory concerns, the GovCloud region is there for you.
Yes.
There's an ITAR background check that gets done for user accounts. And we have services available in that region to meet those standards that we talked about earlier, the FedRAMP, the FISMA, the HIPAA, the DoD CCSRG, et
Now you said
cetera.
FedRAMP. Let's talk about which FedRAMP. We're talking FedRAMP moderate.
Not just moderate,
FedRAMP High?
Yeah, FedRAMP High
Alright.
too. And the fact that we can meet those as well as the DoD CCSRG or Commercial Cloud Security Requirements Guide requirements, that's pretty powerful stuff.
It is.
It's a mouthful for
It is a mouthful.
Acronyms, but pretty sweet. So back to the AWS services?
Sure.
All right.
Back to the AWS services.
So one of the services that we might want to talk about is Shield, right?
Shield is a great service to talk about.
So it was mentioned earlier in question, so it definitely is useful to talk about again. So what's Shield give us?
Okay, so Shield standard is baked into AWS. It does, as you can see on the screen here, we've got a comparison between Shield Standard and Shield Advanced. Now, Shield Standard is every AWS account across the board.
Wait a second. So what you're saying is we take a security and governance model, we apply it across all of our regions globally and any account that has access?
Yes,
What?
we do.
That's crazy. It's almost like we take security seriously here.
I think there's something that's job zero?
Yeah,
I don't
something
know.
like that. Sounds familiar.
Is this a zero? Is this job zero?
Too
We'll
much
say
red
that's job
tape.
that-
All right, here we go. So
Okay.
what about advanced?
So Advanced gives you additional visibility and reporting, as well as a dedicated response team for incident management, should a DDoS incident actually arise. Now, Shield Standard does help protect from distributed denial of service attacks for web applications, which is pretty helpful for anyone running a web application.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my thought. But Shield's Advanced also has cost protection baked in, which helps prevent, if you're scaling up your infrastructure to deal with a distributed denial of service, Shield Advanced has some cost protections around that. So it's something to explore. It's probably something that should be made at the organizational level rather than any individual developer deciding to go flip a switch. Not that any of you would ever do that.
Right.
But that is absolutely something that should be considered.
Yeah. So another one would be AWS WAF or Web Application Firewall.
Absolutely.
So WAF essentially allows you to have common web exploits protected by this distributed web application firewall. You can also import rule sets and it can become part of a standard deployment practice for your security team. And it's a managed service, so it's easy to stand up and easy to manage, which kind of takes a lot of the burden off.
Well, what if I have something that I'm already familiar with that I'm using on-prem?
Yeah, so we have over 10,000 partners in Marketplace. So if you're used to doing something on-prem with a set of appliances that you work with today, guess what? They're most likely available as an Amazon machine image in our Marketplace, and you can spin up and pay by the minute or hour as needed.
Yep.
Or, some of them have BYOL license options too. So we have another question that just came in.
Oh, good.
This one, again from Training City. Does Shield work if I am using CloudFront?
Does Shield? Yes, Shield does work if you're using CloudFront. So CloudFront, for those unfamiliar, is our content distribution network, right? It's a way of pushing content to our POPs, our points of presence that are distributed globally. And that is part of a mitigation strategy and also something to accelerate content.
Yeah.
Dynamic or static content, so that people using your application, watching videos, can get that quicker.
So Shield, as part of the DDoS
Yes.
Shield, actually is part of that distributed denial of service by distributing across the points of presence and using some of the CloudFront capabilities. Yeah, it's pretty solid. Doing pretty well on questions.
We're still good on
All right.
questions.
So what about? We've talked about the services that are going to help us from compliance on the outside. We've talked about the encryption of data in flight. We talked about encryption of data at rest. What about watching for compliance inside and scanning and doing those types of functions?
So last week we touched on and implemented one config rule. For those of you who want to go back and watch it, I believe there's a link to the whole series and you can go see how setting up config rules works. But let's talk about GuardDuty and Inspector.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff.
So GuardDuty allows you to build out, to bubble up findings into a dashboard. And you'll see here I did what I suggest you don't do, and I logged in as root earlier today, less than 11 minutes ago, and as a result, that has bubbled up in the GuardDuty's findings. And it's low severity because I have MFA on, I've provided the correct credentials, but if this was a surprise, well, that's not the kind of surprise you want.
No, not at all.
Fortunately, for the purposes of this demo, I totally did this on purpose instead of logging in with the correct account the way I'm supposed to. But you can set up CloudWatch events so that GuardDuty's alerts are pushed to CloudWatch, and so you have a nice central log location still. Now, I also mentioned.
So what are some of the reasons, right, that we'd want to push these logs together? We kind of mentioned them a little bit last week,
mention
right?
a little bit last week on centralized logging. So it's not just a convenient place for you to go find what's been going on, which it is, but there are compliance requirements around inviolate logs.
Yeah.
That maybe those logs can be, write once, read many, and that's it.
Right.
So if that's the case, this is another set of logs that can be pushed to CloudWatch and also have those compliance requirements met.
So we could use an S3 bucket, encrypt it,
Yep.
minimize the amount of permissions to a granular level of who has access, and that could be that set of logs that become immutable for all time.
You could set it up so that to delete anything, you require an MFA, similar to how we logged in.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways you can make sure that those logs are the logs. Now, another thing you mentioned was Amazon Inspector.
Yeah.
So Amazon Inspector will allow you to build and run assessments against your set of resources. Now, I ran a default assessment earlier today, and you'll see this run completed with my analysis. And I just used the standard template to create an assessment event. But you can actually go quite deep on the templates here. You'll see the rules package that I've got here is common vulnerabilities and exposures, CIS, which came up last week, operating system security configuration benchmarks. These are part of the standard rule set that I'm running in my inspector. And then network reachability and best practices for security. So I've got this set to run once a week. You might need to run it more often than that.
So what about heuristics? Is this only using the threat intel provided by Amazon?
No, actually.
Nice. So I can bring my own threat intel so my security team can feel more comfortable using
Absolutely.
the inspector tool and enable them to have the same set of security and threat vulnerabilities being searched by inspector as if they were running on-prem.
On-prem, yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
And it generates reports. If you wanted to download a PDF report or a summary of its findings, for those of you who need to store those reports.
Yeah, who doesn't love a good security report?
Everybody loves
Everybody loves a good security report.
That's what I read to go to sleep.
Yeah. So, all right, cool. So we've seen, how these tools work. What about that data traffic? So within our VPC architecture that we build out within our AWS accounts, we have that zero trust enclave that we've established.
We have,
but how
yes.
do we track the actual traffic and flow? So if you've ever worked with your security team, you've probably sat there while they were grepping traffic running across the wire, looking for vulnerabilities or what that traffic pattern looked like within your application stack. What can we do to turn something like that on or enable that within a VPC?
So I go into my VPC dashboard here, and I can do this on a per VPC level. There are ways to automate this so that it is always enabled if you're provisioning new accounts. But I'm going to talk right here about enabling it at a particular VPC level. Now, I did this earlier today, but the actions on this are very straightforward. I select the VPC, I click on the flow log tab. Right, I click create flow log. That's a pretty low bar here.
Yeah, that seems really easy.
And I can filter. I can filter on accepted, rejected, or all packets.
Okay.
If I really want to do that, and I can send it to CloudWatch logs, or to that inviolate S3 bucket. Now I've already got something going to an inviolate S3 bucket, so I'm going to just attach this to the Cloud Trail default log group. And I need to attach the appropriate role. If the role doesn't have permissions to publish, I can either add that or I can just go to something that I know does have the ability to do that. So I'm going to set up those permissions very quickly. Create a new role, flow logs role. Policy document is in place for me. It allows the creation and publishing to the log groups. Say allow. Takes me back to where I was. And I hit refresh. There's my flow log role. And create. Flow logs created.
That easy.
Yeah, that easy.
That's pretty impressive. So now we're collecting the network traffic that's running across the VPC, across the security groups within the VPC, across the instances when they're talking, and then across the gateways, right? So we're dumping all of that traffic flow into our bucket, and we can start running analytics against it to see what's going on.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. So we've gone through like all the encryption layers. I think something that might be worth going back and touching on a little bit is when we talk about the roles within IAM, right? So what about federation? So you mentioned federation between accounts, but what if an environment or organization is already using a different IAM solution? How might they go through the process of federating with something like that?
Well, there's a couple of different ways, but let's set up an example and we can talk through it. Let's say you're using Active Directory on premise, as many of you likely are, as your identity and management solution.
Sure.
So there's a couple of different ways of extending Active Directory to AWS. I think we touched very briefly on the Active Directory connector, which is essentially a proxy for Active Directory requests that can be put down to your on-prem Active Directory. And that might be over a VPN connection or a direct connect, since someone asked about direct connect earlier, or even better, a VPN connection over.
Yeah. Just keep it secure.
Hand.
Always be encrypting.
Yes. And everything I was going to say.
And you're done.
I love it. That was great.
All right, so
let's talk about Active Directory and Federation.
So you can extend into Active Directory via the connector, right? So now I can proxy the connection into AWS. There's also the directory services capability of running a managed Active Directory environment.
Absolutely.
And so there I can actually extend schema from on-prem. And so, all right, so now I've had that federation, or I have the extension going at least. How do I go into the federation? What are we using there?
So for the federation of that, we would actually be using roles with the specific policies, similar to how you would go from one account to another. You would define the roles ahead of time with the permissions in place. And then you could allow a group of users in Active Directory to use the secure token service to assume the role. Essentially, they get a token for a period of time that's configurable.
Right.
And when that token expires, they have to go get another token. When many of you are thinking, oh, wow, applications work that way. Well, users can too. And that's how they would get from their identity provider account, whatever that login is, to other accounts throughout their organization.
So STS using SAML assertions into IAM, and then picking up the role, and then assuming that role to pass it into a service. It's pretty awesome stuff that then you don't have to really change the way that you're managing your IDM today.
Right.
And we got another question in from Mike E. I'm guessing that's how it's said. Will there be any intro demo to Service Catalog?
I wasn't planning one, but we can absolutely show how that will work in a future episode.
Yeah.
This is interactive as much as the internet is. In that, if you ask a question and we think it's a good one, we can show off Service Catalog.
Yeah, definitely. We picked up the organizations from last show, so definitely worth getting into.
Yeah.
So, all right, with everything that we've covered, and we've gone through a lot, I think, from a security standpoint.
Apologies if we were flying there a little bit. We had a lot to cover.
Yeah, we were trying to get everything crammed in here. So it's important to note, right? So when we talk about this encryption and how we move through, as Werner says, right? You want to dance like nobody's watching and encrypt like everybody is. So that's kind of the goal here, right? Is we want to make sure that we're encrypting at all stages as we move through, and that's going to go back to your security and your compliance regime. They're going to have a say in how you do that.
Yes.
We want to make sure that we're properly putting the guardrails in place, as you said, for both accounts, so that we're tracking and not getting to a point where one account can impact others, and also ensuring that we're only managing the services that we want our admin or our application developers to use under the covers. We want to ensure that we're encrypting data at rest, right? So that we're covered there as well. And then we want to be able to make sure that we can scan and ensure security of those underlying services that are being used, and then provide some sort of back channel feed for reports. All right, sweet. So
You just covered a lot.
Yeah.
If you take away one thing out of this, it's encrypt. If it's two things, it's encrypt, in transit, and at rest. And if it's three things, it's what he just said.
It felt like more than three. But
It was, yeah.
Cool. So, any parting thoughts here? What are you thinking? Like, we definitely want to touch on.
We do.
Service catalog. We'll get that brought into
Absolutely.
how we automate some of the app secure app deployments.
Yep.
We're going to go into our next episode, which is talking about building secure code.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one.
And our blog post for this episode is live,
Yeah, I think so.
and will be posted in the chat room.
Maybe it's already been posted.
All right.
I don't know. I can't see the chat.
And so, what other questions do we have from the audience?
Questions,
We're good?
comments?
We've really satisfied everybody?
I really doubt that.
That's awesome.
I'm going to put the tinfoil hat back on if that's the case. And
All right.
if there, that's fine. If there are no questions, we can continue to talk about security.
Something that we talked about in the chat that might be better with a bigger audience is people worried about losing or damaging their MFA devices, and what we can do when that happens.
I keep mine close to my heart. Like, that's a thing I do.
No, that's a
That's
good
a
concern.
reasonable question.
So we've had folks lose access to their MFA devices in the past.
Do you want to talk red tape?
Yeah, it gets a little sticky, but so that runs through our support team. So a
It does.
ticket needs to be opened, and our support team can work with you to validate the ownership of the account, and then revocate the MFA device and reinstantiate the account back to the original approved owner.
Approved owner.
And then you can go back through the process of enabling MFA. It takes a while to go through the process, but that's because, again, security being job zero, we want to ensure that users are validated that they are the owner of that account.
Absolutely.
It's a great
appropriate.
question,
It
yeah.
is. It is a good question. It's not something I recommend.
Yeah,
If you can avoid it, maybe don't do that.
And also, it's a good idea to have the QR code screenshot or something.
If you're using a soft MFA, then yes, absolutely. Store that someplace securely. Preferably not encrypted with something you also might lose.
Yeah, the way I always recommend it is once you get your root account MFA'd, you take that, you print out
Yeah, you print it out
the
or
keys, and then
something.
you take you take your MFA device and you lock it away.
Oh, yeah.
Fireproof, safe.
Fireproof is important.
Somewhere where only the folks that have privileged access know how to get into it.
I've heard people break it up. Someone has part of the code, someone has another part of the code. It
Depends on your security posture for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So were there other questions?
Yes. Thor's Lost Kitten asked if users can also export the generated keys in order to perform encrypted backups outside AWS.
I like that question.
That is a good question. Go ahead. Also, awesome username.
Yeah, I think I like the username more than the question. That is a difficult one. If you are importing your key material, you presumably already have a copy of that key material.
Yeah. If it's user-generated key material from on-prem, then yes, right. You can use that for for managing encryption of backups on-prem.
Sure.
If you're leveraging KMS for the key solution, then you can't export that to go back to on-prem.
Right.
So that, I mean, it seems like a valid use case. There's plenty of use cases for why you would want to back up
Sure.
to AWS as the backup point, or use a multi-region approach.
Absolutely.
And then ensuring that you're actually encrypting at all stages of that. But
Yes.
that's just going back over what we've already covered from how to encrypt.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So you know what? Let's just you want to open up the IAM one more time,
Yeah.
and let's
Got
take a
IAM right
look
here.
real quick. So some of the roles that are default in here, that actually would be something
Let's dive
interesting
into
to
that
cover.
actually. So we've talked about. Let's go ahead and create a role, and you see here when you try to create a role, you've got to pick the trusted entity, and oh look, SameWolf 2.0, pretty handy.
Yeah.
If you're going to set that up. Now, I don't have a sample provider set up for this run. I think we can talk about that, and there are blog posts out there on that we can link to. There's actually a series of blog posts. If you don't read our security blog, highly recommend you read the security blog. There's some really good stuff in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's go ahead and create a trusted entity. Now, I'm going to say the service that we use this role, sure, EC2. What does that actually do for me? Well, it allows me to provision resources in EC2 that can then call other services on my behalf securely. So the resource itself has its own role attached and can spin up other resources, or depending on the policies I give it, interact with other services in a way that is secure. So I'm not passing credentials back and forth when it makes an API call, if it's all API driven. Instead, it's just being authenticated with IAM at the resource level, which can be very convenient.
So some of the other roles that you might see in here, right? If you were to look and do a search on like an audit role, or
Sure.
like those roles are already pre-existent, right?
Yeah.
So you're not having to recreate the wheel necessarily when going into IAM. You have the option of selecting predefined roles, and you can actually drill into what permissions each role would have, and edit and configure that policy within the JSON.
In the JSON, yes, absolutely. And there are some predetermined roles that are similar to, I think I showed this at one point when we were setting this up, and when we first touched on that. I've attached permissions to, where's this? Auto refresh. There's the existing policies. To job function. So when you're building out your multi-account strategy, you might define roles based on the group that is being, authenticated against, based on job function. So your administrative would have the administrator job policy applied directly to that role that they could assume.
Nice. So we got another question in from Trading City, kind of along those same lines.
Sure.
If I give a group the administrator access policy, do
Yes.
I still need to give the group the billing policy to allow the users associated with the group to see my monthly billing info?
It's a good question.
Yes.
Uh,
let's drill into the administrator access policy.
Oop. I clicked a button. Give me a sec. Go back.
Live demo.
Live. This is what happens live. Okay, policies, administrative access. So you can see here, this is about the most simple set of permissions you can give somebody. In giving permissions in IAM, you give it the effect, the action, and the resource. And this has the effect of allowing all actions against all resources. So the answer is yes.
Yeah. So when you have access to all resources, billing is going to be one of them.
Sure.
So there's a follow-up question, and is that actually even correct or recommended, or should only the root user have access to billing? Finally, does billing policy allow a user with that permission to actually see my credit card details from the root account?
Let's start at the end.
Yeah,
Work backwards.
yeah, exactly.
So we've got 5 minutes left, and the answer is no on the credit card details.
Correct. You cannot see credit card details. PCI compliance would
Yes.
not be happy about that.
No.
And then from whether or not it's needed. So your billing policy is going to be put in place depending on your organization and what they need to see.
Absolutely.
So typically there's a finance team or a accounts payable or accounts receivable team that needs to have access to things like billing information. And so you can provide or create groups that have different levels of billing policy to be able to view different reports, and you can even get very granular as you do a multi-account strategy from a security standpoint to have sub-accounts that have access to see billing data so that they can understand from a chargeback or showback model what they're actually consuming. So you have a couple different options there. I wouldn't say that root user is the right path there, because as we mentioned earlier, the root user is not the account that you want to use to manage this environment.
And I've pulled up the billing and cost management dashboard for those of you not familiar with what it looks like. A brief month-to-month and some forecasting based on current utilization. I think we have one more question and time for one more question.
Yeah. So last question from MKE. Hey guys, this is a little long question. Users want to use CloudFormation template to launch their application, but generally they end up asking for full rights to execute, update, delete, etc. Is there any tool available with AWS that can walk through the CloudFormation script and determine which roles, privileges are required to execute the template?
I'm trying to think.
So
I think you can come close to that, but not all of that.
So Trusted Advisor can actually go through the process of looking at the granular access control from a cloud template, or I'm sorry, CloudFormation template standpoint. There is I'm trying to remember the name of the service that audits the CloudFormation template. Side, you got the one off the top of your head?
this off the top of your head?
Just looking at it. Generally, like CloudFormation takes all the roles that are being created. It needs to have the permission to create those roles. If not, it's not able to create those roles. So we'll get back on that question.
I think so.
Yeah,
So this is
follow up.
with 3 minutes left. That's a good question. So let's circle back and we'll answer that either in an addendum to the blog, on the chat if we can figure it out before then, or before next week.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, and stay tuned for that answer.
Oh yeah. To wrap up, we should probably talk about what we're talking about next week.
Yeah.
Which I think you mentioned, building secure code.
Right.
Always a good thing. We've mentioned the blog post. These videos are being recorded, which is terrifying, and put on YouTube, which is also terrifying.
That does scare me now.
Right?
But so we'll get into next week the process for ensuring that your code repos are secure, your pipeline, your pathing are secure. We'll have a blog post again next week coming out for what that process looks like and give you some tips and guidance. As Justin mentioned earlier, always check out our security blog post.
Absolutely.
Lots of great info there.
Yeah.
And please check out our previous episode on building secure applications on AWS.
And if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer on building secure code, and you want to ask them ahead of time, go for it. You can ask in the chat right now. Have at it.
Yeah, the Twitch stream will continue to record, and we'll be able to take and look at comments that are posted after the fact, and we'll definitely keep a veil of that so that we can make sure that we're answering and keeping the topic relevant for you all and what you need to hear.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's good. That's good.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess in parting,
No, I'm gonna put this back on. Just in
keep
parting.
saying it. Yeah.
That's,
I don't even
that's
know
all
what
I
to
got.
say. So we have secure environments, right? We have ways to build these secure applications. We've secured our regions. We deploy them globally with the same rule set so that we can ensure that we have the same models deployed and capabilities deployed globally. You have a distributed solution for securing applications as you come in. You have a secure way to deploy and manage applications that are within your environment. We've talked about encryption and everything else, so
It's gonna be a
you know,
frustrating.
yeah,
Sorry.
it's blinding me a little bit. So yeah, I think that about wraps us, and any parting thoughts from you or the folks in the lounge?
Well, if you have questions and want to go deeper, you can ask your AWS Solutions Architect. If you have an account, then you can probably talk to a Solutions Architect.
Yeah.
Especially in these larger organizations, they're great resources.
Absolutely.
That's what we do. Guys, want to say goodbye?
Yeah. Bye. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you back here and in the chat next week.
Really appreciate it. I'm gonna wave for the last 15 seconds. Just a
Thanks all.
wave. Yeah, appreciate it, guys.